Hello, everybody. I'd like to introduce you to Lindsey Rudd, who's the chair of the British Concrete Transport Association and works in the sector providing vehicles for delivering concrete. Thank you for joining us today, Lindsey.
No problem at all, David.
So can you give us an overview of the concrete sector and how it fits into and links up to the supply chain?
Yeah, I can try. I mean, the concrete sector itself is a bit of a bad land, if you like. There's very limited industry standard, unfortunately, at the moment. It promotes a very high level of health and safety, but very limited in the logistics and delivery of concrete standards, which is why we set up the British Concrete Transport Association to try and address this. So at the moment, you can deliver concrete from a batching plant to a job in many manners. A volumetric mixer, which is basically a mixer that takes constituents of concrete out to a site and then measures and mixes on site, and a barrel mixer that will load one whole lump of concrete and just take one type and one sort from one place to another. And of course, you can deliver on tippers and a few other means as well, pumping stations and so on and so forth. But every vehicle is completely different at the moment. The industry itself is governed by very limited standards, and that's what we're looking to change and integrate within the industry.
And the idea of the BCTA is that to create uniform standards, and will that include uniform types of vehicles, or is it more just general standards?
More standards. I mean, at the moment, you can buy concrete mixers, like you said, in volumetric style. You can buy them a European import vehicle. Excuse me a second, phone was just going off. A European import vehicle, which is built for a different market altogether. Then you've got mixers built in the UK. Every single different gear and different kit on board. Every single one's got different starting weights and so on and so forth. So it's one of these things where you can't really standardize the vehicle itself, but what you can try and do is standardize the industry. So at the moment, one of the biggest issues across our market sector at the moment really is the lack of industry standards. So the ready mix industry promotes high levels of health and safety, but generally they're not implemented or policed, unfortunately. And then, of course, the actual delivery of concrete, the driving of concrete at the moment, there's very little standards or specifications in it. So for example, the only qualification you need to drive a concrete mixer currently today is HGV license. So you could be, driving in one sector for 30 years and be the greatest bread van driver in the world, but get in a concrete mixer the next day, exactly the same qualification needed, but a completely different vehicle that you're driving with completely different characteristics, load security, safety, and so on and so forth. And what we're trying to do within the BCTA is pull together all the experts within the industry in order for there to be a voice from each part of the sector and each part of the supply chain in order to create one powerful message that is the same from the ground level to the very highest level.
God, that's very good, and that would be great for to have generalizations of standards and processes that everyone works to and adheres to. And will you be looking who are the type of people might join the association? Will it be manufacturers and distributors and even the big plants and builders as well, or will it be just on the supply end?
No, 100%. So because it's basically to cover the entire concrete industry. So all of our members, associate members, and industry experts, everybody all from completely different walks of life. So we've got currently members and associate members from the concrete mixer manufacturer industry, so the people building the vehicles themselves. We've got people from insurance companies, the guys that insure these vehicles on the road. We've got training specialists, people that train people to drive them. We've got specialists in wastewater management, because obviously concrete, as you may or may not know, is heavily alkaline. So as soon as you add water to the cement to make concrete, which you need to, obviously that water then becomes hazardous waste effectively, and any that drains off, because it's not pH neutral any longer. So there's lots of different people within the industry, whether it be lawyers and solicitors, which may end up prosecuting or defending people in court if they have an issue with concrete mixers. And with the greatest deal of respect, another issue that you may or may not know about is at the moment concrete mixers are very top heavy. So a lot of them, well, not a lot of them, but I think it's a lot. And 1% of the vehicles on the road every year roll over because they're driven poorly, or the scenarios they drive through are poor, or the track training on the vehicle itself is poor. So more and more concrete mixer drivers and concrete companies and people that then find themselves in front of the Transport Commissioner and in front of legal representatives where there's been an incident with the concrete mixer where someone's unfortunately died or been injured, or there's been a property damage or whatever, which could have been avoided through correct training or through correct processes and correct industry standards from the very start. And that's what we're aiming to achieve. So in answer to your question, all of our members are all walks of life. We've got members of certain other trade unions. We've got, like I say, manufacturers, users, trainers, lawyers, even members of Parliament, and so on and so forth within that group.
No, it's fantastic, and now that you're doing communications like this, becomes more awareness, and hopefully gets people joining, and you can share visions and values, because we've had the Association of Pallet Networks on here. We've also had the Warehouse Association on here, so also aiming for those similar values and processes and systems that are agreed by everyone to protect everyone, the users and the public, but also to have a uniform standards. So that's really good. I'm glad about that, Lindsey.
Exactly.
The question I ask everyone: what brought you into the sector? Did you plan to go into it, or did you fall in it? It's really like most of us logisticians.
Well, I fell into it. I mean, it's a good question. I never meant to come into the concrete sector at all. I mean, I was in renewable energy and solar panels and things like that before, and I ended up putting some solar panels in a local industrial estate, and it led me to a company in Telford that was building concrete mix at the time, that were in the market for a sales director, and A plus B equaled C at that point. And then my career now has gone down the concrete mixer road for the last 15 years now. So I've been involved with, was the market leader. Then I moved on to a new company who then became the market leader and held that position for quite a long time, which I'm proud to say. And then the time came earlier in the year for me to leave mixer manufacturing and go into consultancy and sort of trying to pass on whatever classes as expertise to people that may need it. And then my current role is back in manufacturing, and that was basically by a company that's well established in the realms of vehicle manufacture, black steel manufacture, and all aspects of commercial vehicles, who are just getting into the concrete industry. And for me, it was a good position to look at a business from the outside in and say, there's a strong business here with a really good moral and a really good following, and they're just bringing a concrete mixer into the market, and whoever's going to look after that process is going to have an absolute blast doing it. So it may as well be me. So I'm backing on the manufacturing side of things. And pushing products and really enjoying it, as I always have.
Good, yeah, and also, with that, extensive knowledge of the sector, that's a lot of value to people purchasing, what they're looking for. So, if you were describing them, what are the current challenges in the marketplace?
I think I touched on it just earlier on. The biggest challenge in the marketplace for concrete, really, and the first one I would say is lack of industry standard, because, like I say, that there really isn't any standard for anybody to follow. The second thing I would say is that when there is standards pushed through, they're not particularly enforced, which also we're trying to harbour down on up there as well. And that's not we're literally not there to get people into trouble and to say, point the finger at people. But if a vehicle is designed to carry 32-ton weight on the road and it's well overweight, then it needs to be addressed. If people aren't trained properly in that market, it needs to be addressed. If people driving around in a concrete mixer, are a threat to their key stakeholders and their surroundings and the infrastructure around that, then that needs to be addressed. It's been something that I've said, one or two times before, is the fact that if you're a trained tank driver will kill far less people than an untrained concrete mixer driver. So, and that's a vehicle built to do damage to people. So it's, we've got a process out there right now where there's 5,000 barrel mixers and probably 1,000 volumetrics out on the road every day. Certainly registered. There's probably 1,000 less than that operating on a day-to-day basis because customers use a lot of companies have got spare trucks and things like that, and there's guys that maybe haven't got as much work as they would like. But in a world where construction is ruling the world, and obviously concrete is a big part of that. There's a lot of vehicles knocking around on the UK road at the moment that are not being policed or standardised or trained in the right zones, and that's obviously one of the biggest things. The other thing is that to ensure the concrete supply chain can adapt and tackle the challenges ahead, like things like the mixer rollovers, load security, weight, the environmental problems from concrete wash water and stuff, all current issues that have never been dealt with or policed before. There needs to be standards in the industry, otherwise we're just going to end up chasing our tail for the next 30 years. And unfortunately, like I say, there's about 40 mixers per year roll over in the UK, which is 1% of everything that's on the road, which is 1% of any vehicle category rolling over and hurting people is way too many. So if in the way we can look at things, we can put standards and processes in and proper training, if we can just prevent one mixer from rolling over or one mixer accident in this year, then okay, it may not be the result we're after, but it's definitely a success compared to where we are now.
Great, that's wonderful, and thanks for going through that. And when you look at the sector for vehicles, etc., obviously I know you're going to try and get the compliance and rules through the association picked up, but in the general sort of economic marketplace, what do you see as the biggest opportunities for the concrete sector in the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, infrastructure and construction products, small and large, rely on concrete, and obviously there's more and more people coming into the UK, there's more and more people in the world, so there's more and more people going to need concrete, so the opportunities are always going to continue to grow in that sector. And obviously what we need to be able to do is provide a usable roadmap through the challenges faced and support obviously everybody as the industry continues to evolve. And also biggest opportunities as well, I suppose, is also, I would think, probably the concrete industry's biggest threat, which is decarbonisation and so on and so forth, because concrete manufacture and concrete use in itself is extremely carbon heavy, whereas the world at the moment is poised completely for decarbonisation and net zero and carbon neutral and so on and so forth, which is exactly where it needs to be. But the access of supply and demand or cost and effectivity and so on and so forth isn't quite there in the industry right now. So I know a lot of people are getting constraints on them to reduce their carbon footprint by using electric vehicles and hydrogen vehicles. And yes, there is electric concrete mixers out there and there is hydrogen long source vehicles and so on. But of course, then you end up in a situation where the cost becomes high and the usability becomes slightly lower because the technology isn't quite there yet. They're all going in the right direction and everything, I'm sure, will be absolutely fine at the end of it all. But I think we're coming to that hurdle probably slightly quicker than everybody thought we were going to. And therefore, the UK and the world's outlook of, I suppose, what's the best way to put it, greenwashing, is, as someone once put it to me, the problem is making the industry quite penny rich and pound poor at the moment.
Okay, no, I appreciate that, and in some ways you answered the next question about both the opportunities and the threats, to the sector, and I appreciate that. What are people in the sector not talking about that they should be? Obviously, I know you mentioned about standards and all that stuff, and you're addressing that through the association. Are there any other things that they're not talking about? That they talk about amongst themselves that's not in public domain?
Back to what the things we've covered already on a shorter leash, really, is sort of load security. That's a major concern for many sectors, and ours isn't any different. The DVSA updated the load security code of practice back in 2023, and the environmental challenges from the hazardous pH of concrete wash water as well, and the new Environment Act links back to load security issues. So basically effective driver training, ensuring consistency across the board, which is obviously help eliminate mixer rollovers, and there's a lot of things in our industry that aren't talked about because, being honestly, they're issues that people don't want to address. The bottom line, David, is that on a day-to-day basis, whether you're one of the national fleets who's delivering millions of tons of concrete, or whether you're, Lindsey running his one concrete mixer down the road delivering, 8 or 10 or 15 or 20 cubic meters a day, so they all cross over in this path, and every single person's got exactly the same agenda for the day, and that's to get up in the morning, fill their truck with concrete, deliver it somewhere and make as much money as they possibly can, and come back and then wash it off and start again the day after, which is obviously a brilliant way to run a business. But there's got to be some aspects in industry standards to go along with that. And anything that gets in the way of taking concrete from A to B tends to start being looked at as a taboo subject. And then of course, if you've got two mixers, for example, and you've got one trained driver and one that isn't, but you've got a lot of money to be made by delivering concrete, of course you're going to put both drivers out to send concrete out, and that one guy, let's be blunt, is not ready to do it. So the chances of him now going out and costing you more money in the long run is obviously going to be a lot higher. And I don't just mean from accidents on the road, but I just mean in poor delivery, poor use of the vehicle. For example, if a barrel mixer is spinning 10 times a minute versus one that's spinning 1 time a minute, the one that's spinning 10 times a minute is going to wear out 10 times as quick. It's just simple mathematics, and unfortunately these things are expensive to replace. A barrel concrete mixer will set you back, including your chassis, about 150, 160,000 pounds, and a volumetric probably 300,000 pounds. If you put someone behind the wheel who doesn't know how to drive them effectively, yes, they'll probably get from the start of the day to the end of the day without hurting anybody and making you lots of money. But at some point, that lack of training is either going to create an accident, or it's going to create a maintenance problem, or it's going to create a spares and repair issue, or a lack of self-maintenance. Like for example, concrete mixers need washing off every night, and if you'd imagine a concrete is heavily alkaline, the guys wash it off with a heavily acid fluid. So now not only are you contaminating the water around you with an alkaline product, you're also adding acid back into it, and of course spraying acid onto a vehicle that's made of steel, sooner rather than later that's going to start having a structural impact on the vehicle as well. So that's one of the sort of industry issues. And then, of course, the manufacturers themselves are always looking at how we can make a vehicle that's lighter to carry more concrete, because concrete's a payload business. But unfortunately, when you make a vehicle too light, it then becomes a risk on the road again. So you have a situation where you then get maintenance issues. You get trucks, falling apart. let's be blunt, after in a much shorter order than they used to. So back in the early days of concrete, when they just loaded as much up as they possibly can, then of course the road weights came in, and then of course now we're all deeming to, on an 8 meter mixer, 32 ton road weight, for example, if you're at a push to try and carry 8 cubic meters, and I'm well aware that there's mixers out there right now going out on the road with a 36 or 35 or even 37 ton road weight, when they should only be carrying 32. And the reason for that is because the mixer can carry a larger amount of concrete, so it does, and the guy driving it isn't trained properly in driving it, and therefore his mixer's probably carrying build-up or issues or too much water and so on and so forth. So then in effect you've got a problem. And then it goes back to the fact of lack of industry standards, that if it was being policed and these trucks were being stopped on the road and being told that you're overweight, and therefore there's a punishment for it, whatever that may be, then they wouldn't be running at this high weight. Therefore, there wouldn't be as much of a risk of a rollover. There wouldn't be as much of an issue with poor maintenance. One thing there would be, though, is a lot less concrete being delivered by that truck, and that becomes then a taboo issue for the industry, because that means the companies make less money. So.
Okay, no, thank you. I appreciate that. And it's obviously a complex sector, like all sectors are, and then you understand the nuances, return on investment for people buying them, vehicles wearing out. And thanks for going through that. How is the green transition impacting the concrete delivery sector?
Well, again, I think we touched on it slightly earlier, and obviously there's now electric mixers coming out. But the problem with the decarbonisation side of concrete, bringing in electric mixers or bringing in hydrogen mixers, that they are brilliant. And I'll be blatantly open with you. I was heavily involved with the launch of the first UK's electric mixer. I'm very proud of that product, and I'm sure the company running with it now is extremely proud of it. And I know it's defining itself and becoming a lot more refined every day. The hydrogen side of things isn't quite there yet, but of course what you do with hydrogen is you get a bigger range than you do on electricity at the moment, and of course the electricity's battery weight impacts therefore on the payload that you can carry on a concrete mixer. So basically there's always going to be a trade-off. So if you're bringing out an electric concrete mixer, for example, that base weight of that vehicle is going to be a lot higher than a standard mixer, in which case you can carry less concrete in it. However, you can then charge a premium for the concrete you are delivering in it, because it's obviously a lot more eco-friendly, and the footprint is a lot lower. But then again, like I said, becomes the affordability, because the other thing with electric vehicles is they're also a lot more expensive than diesel vehicles. So the green side of things is impacting on the concrete industry, firstly through the transport side of things, in the sense that, yes, you can get a more a greener delivery of concrete by using a more ethically transition vehicle through electric or hydrogen or whatever it might be, but you will pay for that in both finance and payload. However, the business then has to be logisticized properly, so it's basically you're getting the money at the back end for it as well.
Okay, that's great, and thanks for that, because it is impacting every sector, both in retail, transition, transport, logistics, everything. It's one of those dilemmas that we're all working our way through and trying to get to where you need to, whilst keeping the costs sensible and allow everyone to make a return. What development in the sector has surprised you most in your career?
Well, if I'm being blunt, David, there's not been a huge amount of development in the sector for the last 50 years or so. I mean, if you look at any concrete mixer from a distance, barrel mixers, for example, they all look exactly the same until you get close enough to notice the difference. And 9 times out of 10, I challenge an untrained eye to find a difference, to be honest. But if you know what you're talking about, you can see the differences. But they do all look the same from a distance away. And the reason is every barrel mixer's got a drum on the back, which has got an Archimedes screw, which pushes concrete in and out. Everybody's got one. Everybody's got the water system on board. If you've ever, I'm sure you're well aware what a concrete mixer looks like, but the concrete mixer's water tank is held at 12 feet high, just above the barrel, and it strangely looks like the shape of an oil drum. And the reason is because about 50 years ago, someone used an oil drum and put it there, and everybody else just copied it, really, and that's how it stayed all these years. So a concrete mixer has been a product it's been one of those if it's not broke, don't fix it items. So because it's always looked that way and it's always worked that way, it still always looks and works that way. The only real development of the mixer over the last 50 years has been the metal that goes into it. For example, a lot of the concrete companies now will use a Hardox variation of 450 or a 500 Hardox, which is a lot lighter. So basically you get a harder metal and a lot thinner metal, so you can reduce your weight. So for example, a 5 mil mild steel barrel gets the same wear as a 3 mil Hardox 450 barrel. So basically you've got what was I going to say? You basically got 40% of the weight of the vehicle of the drum, but the same amount of wear time. But of course, there's a cost incentive on that too. So really, the only developments we've seen is the material that goes into it. However, in recent years, as I said before, there's a couple of companies now bought out electric mixers, which are fantastic. There's some serious technological updates as well, with things like vehicle tracking, load tracking, slump definition, which basically means you can keep a concrete from the same consistency from when you leave the batching plant to where you're going to, by adding the right amount of water as you go, because the concrete's monitored and stuff like that. So there is a lot of groundbreaking additions into the industry right now. But if you were to say what's development has surprised me, I'd probably say there hasn't been a huge amount of development. It's been the same thing, and people have tinkered around trying to change a problem or try and prevent a problem, and end up causing another one somewhere along the line, and everybody goes back to the way that it was. So.
Yeah, thank you, Lindsey. And it almost goes back to, if it's not broke, don't fix it. And logistics hasn't changed that much, because you bring something from point A to point B, hopefully in good condition and on time, and that's what people expect, and so they should, So the last question I'm asking everyone is, if you could speak to the Prime Minister, then what would you ask them to do to help to assist your business to grow and flourish?
The BCTA at the moment does lobby the DVSA and the Department for Transport and the earn recognition. We work very, very closely with all of the the Department for Transport and etc., which do work quite closely with Parliament. But if I was talking to the Prime Minister face to face, and I was sort of asking him a question that where we could sort this out, it would literally be enforcement of industry standards. So we've now written over the last 3 or 4 years 2 or 3 national operating standards. We've now written 2 or 3 sets of standards for mixer drivers to adhere to for training. So for training, minimum training levels, through minimum maintenance levels, through adherence of company literature, so like adherence and referring back to companies' handbooks and so on, because every mix is completely different. The big issue that we have in the industry, as I think I've touched on 2 or 3 times, is the fact that there's not a great deal of standard involved, and the standards that are involved aren't enforced. So if I was to better speak to the Prime Minister in any stretch of the imagination, would be how do we get these standards enforced, and how do we put some rigid flags in the ground in the concrete industry to A, improve the delivery, B, improve the safety, and more importantly to stop people dying on the road through needless acts of lack of training or poor driving, basically.
Wonderful, thank you. I appreciate that, and I can see the benefits of that. I just want to say thank you so much, Lindsey, for your time and giving us an overview of the sector and the vehicles in it. Really appreciate it, and I'm sure our listeners and viewers will like it. Thank you very much for your time, Lindsey.
No problem at all, David. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.